They say the most patient person in any room is the one who already knows how the story ends. Simone Baxter had known for 11 months. 11 months of folding his shirts the same way she always had. 11 months of kissing him goodbye at the door, of asking about his day, of pretending she didn't recognize the faint trace of someone else's dry shampoo on the collar of his jacket. 11 months of being the woman he thought was too busy with spreadsheets and grocery lists to notice anything at all. What Devin Baxter never understood about his wife was the same thing men like him never understand about the women they underestimate. That the qualities they mistake for weakness, the quietness, the patience, the willingness to keep the household running while he ran around, are not weakness at all, they are discipline. And discipline, when applied with enough time and enough grief and enough cold, clear purpose, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a plan. The morning it all came apart began the way most mornings did in the Baxter house in Raleigh, North Carolina. Devin was already in the shower when Simone came downstairs at 6:45. The coffee maker was dripping. The dog, a 10-year-old beagle named Pepper, was turning circles by the back door. Simone let Pepper out, poured herself a mug, and stood at the kitchen window looking at the backyard she had planted herself. The raised beds of lavender and rosemary. The Japanese maple she had dug in the summer before they got married. The stone path she had laid one Saturday afternoon, while Devin was at what he called a golf weekend, but was, she now knew, a long weekend at a boutique inn in Asheville, with a 26-year-old named Courtney, who worked in his firm's marketing department. She had found that out first. The Asheville trip, but she hadn't stopped there. Devin came downstairs in his navy suit, the one he wore on Fridays because it photographed well, and he had lunch with clients on Fridays. He poured his coffee. He kissed her cheek. He smelled clean, which meant nothing. He had started being very clean. "You working late tonight?" Simone asked, not looking away from the window. "Probably. The Harmon account is a mess." He checked his phone. "Don't wait up." She nodded. He was gone by 7:15. Simone stood in the kitchen until she heard his car back out of the driveway. Then she set down her mug, walked upstairs, and went to the second bedroom, the one they called the study, the one Devin used to store golf bags and boxes of documents he never looked at. She opened the closet. Behind a banker's box of old tax filings, she pulled out a leather portfolio she had put there 3 weeks ago. Inside was everything. The photographs from the investigator she had hired in January, a quiet woman named Pat, who worked out of a small office on Hillsborough Street, and wore the same gray cardigan every time they met. The hotel receipts printed from Devin's corporate card, which Simone had access to, because she had managed the household accounts since the beginning, and Devin had never thought to revoke that access, because Devin, at his core, was lazy in the ways that only truly arrogant men can afford to be. The emails, because Devin used the same password for his personal account that he used for every account. His college graduation year followed by his initials, something Simone had known since the second month they dated. There were also the legal documents. Those were the most important part. Simone Baxter was not, as Devin liked to describe her at parties, a homebody. Before they married, she had been a licensed CPA with her own client portfolio and a reputation for being meticulous to the point of legend among her colleagues. When she left the firm after their second year of marriage, because Devin had pushed gently and then not so gently, for her to manage their life, the new house, the eventual family that never quite came, she hadn't let her license lapse. She renewed it quietly every 2 years. She continued to do work on the side, small clients, nonprofit boards, the kind of quiet professional engagement Devin dismissed as her little projects. Her little projects had included, for the past 11 months, a very careful reorganization of every financial structure that touched their life. Devin thought the house on Meadowlark Drive was in both their names. He was half right. When Simone had refinanced 18 months ago, Devin had signed the papers at the kitchen table without reading them, because he never read papers Simone put in front of him, which was one of the reasons she had married him and also, eventually, one of the reasons she had stopped loving him. The deed had been restructured. The equity belonged to a trust that bore her maiden name, Simone Alara Whitfield, trustee. Devin's name remained on the mortgage liability. His name was not on the asset. It was the kind of detail that took 3 consultations with a real estate attorney named Howard to get exactly right. Howard had looked at her over his glasses during their last meeting and said, "You understand that if this ever goes to litigation, the opposing counsel will argue." "I know what they'll argue," Simone had said. "And I know what the statute says. I've read it 4 times. Howard had smiled in the way people smile when they realize they've underestimated someone. "He's going to be very surprised. That's the idea," she said. She put the portfolio back behind the banker's box. She showered, dressed, and drove to her own office, a small suite on the third floor of a building on Glenwood Avenue that Devon thought she visited maybe once a month. She had been going there 3 days a week for 2 years. She had a lot to finish before tonight. Devon didn't come home at midnight, which was fine. He didn't come home at 2 in the morning either, which was also fine, because Simone wasn't there. At 10 o'clock that Friday night, Devon's key stopped working in the front door of the house on Meadowlark Drive. The locksmith had come at 4 that afternoon and taken less than 30 minutes. Simone had tipped him $20 and given Pepper a treat, and then sat in the kitchen with a glass of sweet tea and felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was nothing at all. Not relief, not grief, not triumph. Just a quiet stillness, like the moment after a long exhale. She was staying at her sister's house in Durham. She had been there since 7 that evening. Her sister, Kezia, had poured wine and asked 0 questions and turned on a nature documentary about tide pools, which was exactly the right thing to do. Devon discovered the lock at 11:48 p.m. Simone knew this because the security system, which he also hadn't changed the credentials on, and which sent alerts to her phone, logged his keypad attempt at 11:48, followed by 3 failed attempts, followed by a motion sensor ping when he walked around to the back porch. She watched the notification and set the phone face down on Kezia's coffee table. "Still okay?" Kezia asked without looking away from the television. "Still okay," Simone said. Devon spent the night in a hotel. She knew which one because his corporate card sent her a statement alert at 12:23 a.m. The Marriott on Capitol Boulevard, $189 plus tax. He called her cell 6 times. Each call went to the voicemail she had set up 2 weeks ago. A new number, recorded in a professional tone. "You've reached Simone Whitfield. Please leave a message and I'll return your call during business hours." He left 3 voicemails. She did not listen to them for 48 hours. When she did, the first one was confused. The second one was angry. The third one was the one she had expected. The voice of a man who still believed that the situation was manageable. That she was overreacting, that if he could just get her in the same room he could turn this around. The way he had turned around every conflict in their 9 years of marriage, with charm and deflection, and the particular wounded golden retriever expression that had worked on her for longer than she cared to admit. "Simone, come on," the voicemail said. "Whatever you think you know, we need to talk about this like adults. This is our home. You can't just look. Call me back, please." She forwarded the voicemail to Howard. What Devon did next was predictable because Devon was, at bottom, a predictable man. He called his own attorney, a partner at a downtown firm named Garrett who played golf with him on Saturdays and had been to their house for dinner twice. Garrett was competent and expensive, and immediately filed for an emergency injunction to restore Devon's access to the marital home. The injunction was heard on a Tuesday morning. Simone sat on one side of the courtroom in a charcoal blazer, with her hair pinned back, the way she had worn it when she used to present quarterly reports to corporate clients. Devon sat on the other side in his navy suit. He had not shaved over the weekend, and he looked, she noticed without malice, like a man who had not slept well in 4 days. Garrett stood up and made his argument. The house was a marital asset. His client had been wrongfully locked out. The refinancing and trust transfer had been conducted without his client's full informed consent. Howard stood up when it was his turn. "Your Honor," Howard said, "Mr. Baxter signed the refinancing documents at his kitchen table on November 12th. He had legal counsel available to him. He chose not to consult them." Howard paused. "Additionally, the trust transfer is consistent with estate planning protections that Mrs. Baxter has maintained for the minor business assets connected to her licensed CPA practice. There is nothing unusual about a licensed professional protecting those assets in a trust." Another pause. "What is unusual, Your Honor, is that Mr. Baxter was unaware of his wife's professional activities at all, despite the fact that she has maintained an active CPA license and a registered client base for the entirety of their marriage." The judge, a practical woman named Honorable Patricia Elkins, who had been on the bench for 19 years, looked at Devon over her reading glasses with an expression that Simone could only describe as fatigued recognition. She had seen this before. She had seen it many times. The injunction was denied. Devon walked out of the courtroom looking like a man who had just discovered the floor beneath him was made of paper. He caught up with Simone in the hallway, Garrett a step behind him. "You want to explain to me," Devon said, his voice low and tight, "what you think you're doing?" Simone stopped. She turned to look at him. She had prepared herself for this moment for months, rehearsed the version of herself she would be, composed, impenetrable, quiet in the way that is not weakness but its complete opposite. But standing there in the courthouse hallway with the fluorescent lights humming above them, she found she didn't need the rehearsal. She was just herself, She was just tired and clear and completely done. "I'm ending a marriage," she said, quietly and legally and with as little drama as possible. "Quiet?" He laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "You changed the locks. You restructured the deed without telling me. You restructured our marriage without telling me," she said. "I just used the same approach." She walked away. He didn't follow her. Here is what Devin Baxter discovered over the following 3 weeks. In the order he discovered it. He discovered that Simone had moved the funds from their joint savings account to a separate account in her name, alone, 11 days before she changed the locks, which was permissible under state law because it was a jointly held account, and either party could initiate a transfer. The balance at the time of transfer was $64,000. Devin's own account, which he had always maintained separately, with a balance he thought of as his emergency cushion, had $3,000 in it because he had been spending freely for 11 months on a life Simone hadn't been part of. He discovered that the car he drove, a leased BMW 5 Series, was leased through an LLC that Simone had originally set up for her consulting work, and that the LLC had declined to renew the authorization on Devin's name as an approved driver, effective immediately. The leasing company sent a letter. The letter was polite and merciless. He discovered that the vacation property in the Outer Banks, the cottage they'd bought 4 years ago, that he thought of as primarily his because he was the one who had wanted it and pushed for it, and overridden Simone's hesitation about the roof. That cottage had been held in a separate property trust since the year of purchase, a trust that Simone had set up and that Devin had also signed off on, also without reading it, at the time believing it was simply for liability protection, which it was. Liability protection for Simone. The cottage was not a marital asset. The cottage had never been a marital asset. Garrett told him this over the phone, and Devin sat in the Marriott room. He was still at the Marriott, room 214, which was starting to feel like a punishment, and stared at the ceiling and didn't say anything for a long time. "Devin," Garrett said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "What?" "Did you read anything she ever asked you to sign?" The silence stretched out long enough to be its own answer. What Devin did not know, what he would not know until the divorce proceedings moved into their second month, was the part about Courtney. Courtney Albright had been told, at some point in the previous 11 months, that Devin's marriage was basically over. She had been told that Simone knew, that they had an arrangement, that it was only a matter of paperwork. Courtney was 26 and worked in marketing, and was not, by her own later admission to the mediator, overseeing the proceedings, someone who would have continued the relationship, had she known those statements were false. Pat, the investigator in the gray cardigan, had documented 9 weekends and 14 evenings across 11 months. She had photographs and 2 audio recordings that were legally obtained and fully admissible. Simone had submitted every document to her attorney without embellishment or editorial comment. She was not interested in destroying Courtney. Courtney was not the point. Devin was the point. More specifically, the legal terms of the separation were the point, and in the state of North Carolina, documented marital fault is relevant to the distribution of post-separation support. Devin had thought he was the breadwinner. Technically he was, in the sense that his salary from the architectural firm had always been larger than Simone's reported income. What he had not calculated was the difference between reported income and actual assets. Simone's client base, maintained quietly over 9 years, had compounded. Her consulting work had been billed to corporate accounts and structured through her LLC in ways that were entirely legal, and had been disclosed every year on their jointly filed tax returns, returns that Devin had also signed without reading. Garrett sat across from Howard in a conference room in late September and looked at the asset disclosure Simone had filed with the court and said, with genuine professional admiration, "She built a parallel financial life for 9 years. She built a life," Howard said simply. He just wasn't paying attention. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday in October. It had taken 7 months from the night Devin stood outside the house on Meadowlark Drive with a key that no longer worked, and it had been neither quiet nor simple, because Devin had cycled through 4 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, and a particular flavor of wounded pride that masqueraded as righteous indignation, before arriving at the only destination available to him, which was the signed settlement agreement. He kept his personal savings. He kept his salary. He kept his retirement account, minus the portion to which Simone was entitled under QDRO provisions. She kept the house, the cottage, the LLC, the client base, and Pepper. Devin had not asked about Pepper. That was the detail she turned over in her mind the most afterward. That in 9 months of negotiations, of letters between attorneys and financial disclosures, and one very uncomfortable deposition, He had never once asked about the dog they had adopted together on a rainy Saturday afternoon 7 years ago when they were still the kind of people who did things like that. She mentioned it to Kezia once. Kezia had said, "He didn't deserve that dog," and poured more wine. In November, 4 months after the locks were changed, Simone drove back to the house on Meadowlark Drive for the first time since she had left. She had been coordinating everything remotely. Howard and a property manager had handled the interim, and she wasn't sure what she would feel when she pulled into the driveway. She pulled in, she sat in the car for a moment. Pepper, in the back seat, pressed his nose to the window. The Japanese maple in the front yard had turned, the way it did every October and November, a deep wine red that was almost impossible to look at directly in good sunlight. She had planted it the year before they married. She had dug the hole herself with a rented auger and her own 2 hands. And she had poured a bag of bone meal into the earth at the roots, and Devon had watched from the porch and said it looked expensive. She got out of the car. She opened the back door for Pepper, who jumped down and immediately found a spot of interest near the lavender beds. The lavender had gone woody from lack of trimming, but it was alive. She unlocked the front door with her key, which had always been her key, and walked inside. The house smelled like itself, like the cedar candle she kept in the entryway, like the particular quality of air in a house that has sat empty for a few months, a little stale but not unfamiliar, the way a room smells when it has been waiting. She walked through the rooms slowly, the kitchen where she had stood at the window and watched the Japanese maple, and made the decision she had needed to make. The study where she had kept the portfolio in the closet behind the tax files. The living room with the corner Devon had always complained was wasted space, and she had never moved anything from because she liked that corner, and it was, as it turned out, her house. She went upstairs. She went to the bedroom. She had had the bedroom repainted in June, while she was at Kezia's, a pale sage green. Not the white Devon had insisted on when they'd moved in. She stood in the doorway looking at the green walls and the afternoon light coming through the windows and thought about all the mornings she had stood at the kitchen window below, cataloging what she knew and what she still needed to know. 11 months. 2 years of quiet preparation before that. A life she had been building in the margins of a marriage that had slowly become hollow. She was 33 years old. She went back downstairs and sat on the back porch with Pepper at her feet, and she watched the yard. The rosemary was overgrown. The raised beds had gone dry. But the Japanese maple at the front was on fire with color, and the stone path she had laid herself was still level, every stone exactly where she had placed it. There is a particular kind of grief that does not look like grief. That looks instead like calm, like ordinary afternoon light on familiar ground, like a woman's sitting quietly in a yard she planted herself. It is not the grief of loss exactly, but the grief of reckoning, of adding up the years and understanding them clearly for the first time. Simone sat with it. Then she got up and went inside and made a list of what the rosemary beds needed. And what she was going to do with that corner, Devon had always said was wasted space. And what she thought she might plant in the spring. She had a lot of plans.